Okay, well, good morning and welcome to Cinema and the Right to the City. This session explores how film can illuminate and intertwine questions of urban life, citizenship, and belonging. The two documentaries we will watch this morning examine whose cities are built for, whose voices define them, and whose stories are often pushed outside the frame. And through their distinct yet complementary lenses, these films foreground the everyday negotiations of space, power, and survival that shape life in rapidly changing urban landscapes. They remind us that cinema does more than document. It asserts the right of all residents to imagine, claim, and participate in a more inclusive city. The film Hamara Shaher, directed by Anand Patwardhan in 1985, which is now 40 years ago, remains one of the most urgent explorations of urban inequality in India. Yet amid Bombay's dynamic transformation, the film captures the vulnerability of working-class communities facing state-led demolitions, displacement, and the unrelenting pressures of development. Patwardhan follows activists, residents, and laborers as they assert their right to housing, dignity, and a voice in shaping their city. Through patient observation and powerful testimony, Hamara Shaher exposes the contradictions embedded in urban planning, where the language of progress often conceals policies and marginalize the very people who built and sustained the city. At the same time, it shines a light on the solidarity that emerges in the struggle against exclusionary growth. 4 decades later, the film feels uncannily contemporary. Its critique of unchecked development, speculative real estate, and the erasure of informal settlements echoes across India's urban landscape today. The other film we are screening, The Chaviwallahs of Mumbai, is one of our Nagari selections. It offers a sharp, grounded look at the city's unequal water infrastructure, focusing on the valve operators, the Chaviwallahs, who control the flow of water into neighborhoods. The film reveals how access to this most basic resource is shaped by power, bureaucracy, and the improvisation of daily life. Through compelling imagery and close attention to lived experience, it uncovers the politics embedded in Mumbai's pipes and valves, promoting us to consider how cities manage scarcity, privilege, and survival. Together, these films challenge us to rethink what the right to the city means and who gets to exercise it. The screenings will be followed by a discussion with Anand Patwardhan, director of Hamara Shaher, along with Ranjit Hoskote and me, and time permitting, questions from the audience. Enjoy the screening.
मंडाला है, मानकुर मंडाला, ये जो है 1985 में बसा हुआ है। बसते 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 2002 तक पूरी बस्ती बसी है। लेकिन पानी की दिक्कत स्टार्ट से ही थी।
बीएमसी कह रहे थे कि हम लाइट पानी नहीं देंगे। झोपड़े जो है अनलीगल ही थे। उसके बाद डिमोलेशन जो हुआ था उसमें कांग्रेस ने बताया था कि मतलब 2000 के जो भी सर्वे हैं उनको हम आरक्षण देंगे, लेकिन लाइट पानी का तो बताया नहीं।
Although the policy says कि सबको पानी मिलेगा, but then there is still a but कि इनको पानी नहीं मिलेगा।
पानी की बहुत बड़ी तकलीफ है। पहला शुरुआत में लगा था कि हाँ कि हम लकी है, हमें बिल्डिंग में घर मिला है।
डिमोलिशन होने जाता है उसके पहले 1-2 दिन पहले पानी बंद कर देते हैं। मेक दैट ह्यूमन बीइंग फील कि तुम्हारे पास ऑप्शन ही नहीं है, यू विल हैव टू लीव दिस प्लेस।
देखिए ना, एसआरएस स्कीम या एमएमआरडी स्कीम या बीएमसी स्कीम, ये तो वो जानते हैं कि ये हमको क्यों हटा रहे। वो हमारी तकलीफ थोड़ी दूर करें, उनको फैसिलिटी के लिए वो हमको हटाए।
आई एम जस्ट टॉकिंग अबाउट डिमोलिशन, बट द कॉरपोरेटर कैन ऑल्सो डू दिस कि जेई को बोल दिया, सब इंजीनियर को बोल दिया यहाँ का पानी काट दो क्योंकि मैं बोल रहा हूँ। So it's not that they're illegal because a lot of population is brought by BMC here. Right now they're using that cutoff date to not give services. Different kinds of developmental projects BMC or the state government has been doing. They have been shifting people from the island city to this ward. It's like a planned thing to push people from the vulnerable communities here.
मुंबई पूरी खाड़ी ही है। खाड़ी भरते गए, बनाते गए, भरते गए, बनाते गए, जगह मजबूत हो गई, बिल्डर ने लिया, गवर्नमेंट ने लिया, वो लीगल हो गया। जब तक मजबूत नहीं है वो अनलीगल। उनका मसला यही था कि ये लोग नई बस्ती बसाते हैं और ये लोग यहाँ रहते हैं। बम्बई में भार ज़्यादा हो रहा है, इसलिए हम इनको पानी नहीं देंगे तो ये छोड़ के चले जाएंगे।
We are always talking about stopping migration to happen. It's because you don't want certain kind of citizens to come into Bombay. They have been trying to make it Shanghai.
हॅलो, अरे कुठवर पोहोचलाय तू? आज साहेबांची रॅली आहे तिकडच्या एरियात, म्हणून मग तिकडचा वॉल बंद करू नका. हॅलो, हो ऐकून घ्या आधी ताई, अजून आमच्याचकडच्या मेन टाकीत पाणी नाही आलं. इकडं आलं की मला लगेच तुमच्या जाळीकडे सोडणार आम्ही.
पानी वानी तो सब है, पानी अगर नहीं होता तो आता कहाँ से। सोचने वाली बात यह है कि यहाँ इस एरिए से नगर सेवक जीत रहे थे। कांग्रेस के भी नगर सेवक जीते और समाजवादी के भी नगर सेवक जीते, शिवसेना वाले भी जीते। ये तो इनको मालूम है ना, पब्लिक है तब तो इनको वोट मिल रहा है, लेकिन पब्लिक की ज़रूरतें क्या हैं इनको नहीं दिखाई दे रही। मैंने एक बार देखा था 4 इंच का पाइप लगा हुआ था 10-12 साल पहले, वो भी बीएमसी की तरफ से आया था और उसके बाद धीरे धीरे वो पाइप तक गायब हो गया। उस टाइम जो है समाजवादी का नगर सेवक था, अब उन्हीं ने उठवाया कि पब्लिक उठा के लेके चली गई ये नहीं पता चला।
एक टाइम आया था 2008 में, इस बस्ती में क्या यूपी बिहार वाले ज़्यादा थे। अभी एक मोहिते नगर पूरा मराठी एरिया, उसमें पानी आ गया और इसमें पानी नहीं आया। तो पहले ये चलता था कि यूपी वाले को भगाओ इधर से। ये जो रूम देख रहे, ये मेरा लकड़े का रूम था। तो जब पानी आ गया तो मैं बोला अब कुछ फैसिलिटी हुआ, तब मैं जाके ये रूम खड़ा किया।
ये कोई हमारा क्लास नहीं है, देखो झेल है वो बहुत बड़ी बात है जिस माहौल में जैसा भी है। तो इस वजह से ना हर एक घर में ना एक इंजीनियर होता है, कभी मतलब वो अपना पंखा भी दुरुस्त कर लेता। तो पानी लाना ये कौन सी बड़ी बात है, हम बहुत दूर तक जाए गए हैं और इसके लिए बहुत बेइज्जती भी सही है हम लोग।
बिल्कुल लगता है कि मतलब हम अब शहर में समझ लीजिए कि इंटर हो गए। पानी आ गया तो गवर्नमेंट ने एक्सेप्ट कर लिया कि आप भी रहवासी हैं। इससे पहले तो आदिवासी ही थे हम लोग, अब रहवासी हुए हैं।
Taken from these two powerful documentaries that we've just seen, we have Ranjit Hoskote and Nondita Correa Mehrotra in conversation with the filmmaker Anand Patwardhan. I invite our panelists to please come to the stage. To give you a little more insights into our discussants, Anand describes himself as a non-serious human being forced by circumstances to make serious films. He has been making documentary films for over 5 decades, pursuing issues at the crux of social and political life in India. Ranjit is a poet, translator, cultural theorist, and curator. And we have Nondita Correa Mehrotra. She is the director of the Charles Correa Foundation, practices between India and the United States. And she also has an active academic career, teaching studios at the University of Michigan, MIT, and courses at RISD. Ranjit and Nondita, I hand it over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that seeing this film again after a while, and it's really, I mean, I don't ever forget how powerful it is, but to see it again, it really is. And I think Anand, I remember reading a few months ago, someone described you as the difficult truth teller of India. And I think that's what comes through in seeing this film. So thank you for allowing us to screen it and for being here for this discussion. Ranjit Hoskote is a seminal contributor of Indian art and criticism stuff, and he's an Indian poet, done several books, I don't know, over 30 books, I think, and also has curated the exhibition right next door, one called Otherland, at the old GMC. So, do go see that. Yeah, and I don't know whether you want to start with the first question.
Thank you so much, Nondita, for creating this very special platform and occasion to reflect on themes that connect, build form, urban design, planning, policy, these realms which seem relatively abstract, although they have such a strong bearing on our lives. And the way in which the Charles Correa Foundation, and especially through the Nagari initiative, the way in which this seemingly abstract realm is connected to the viscerality of living, to questions of equity and justice and citizenship, that is a very brave endeavor, and it's a privilege to be part of this process. And I also want to say, Anand, that seeing Bombay Hamara Shaher after all these years, I realized that it really meets the definition of a classic. Italo Calvino writes somewhere that a classic is the kind of text, now be that literary or cinematic or other, it's the kind of work that holds its own even in a time and a context that is completely incompatible with its values. And this struck me with great force as we saw this film today. And it's a very particular social experience to see it once again in this kind of space instead of, at home on our laptops now, increasingly. And it reminded me of how the theme of citizenship, of belonging, has been so central to your work, Anand. And again, I was struck by how many of these forms of protest that you chronicle in the film are practically impossible today. It is still very much, even though it is correctly adversarial and critical, your film serves as a chronicle of a participatory politics, where protest and resistance, a dialogue were even possible. Today, that kind of politics no longer obtains. We are now in the era of a punitive politics, where if people like the people we saw in the film were to go out and protest, they would immediately be condemned as anti-national and be put away with no recourse or redress to law or to justice. So it's just, I just want to bear witness to what it meant to see the film in the late 80s as a student and what it means to see it today. And I just want to draw you out, Anand, if we could go into the discussion. It's actually a very simple question. How do you feel about seeing your own film, as it were now, from the outside, and having participated in and borne witness to this great shift in politics? What does it also mean to have been a certain kind of filmmaker in the late 1980s, with the emergency not that far behind? The imprint of the emergency was extremely strong while you were making this film. And today we are in another kind of emergency. So could I draw you out on that?
Yeah, I've said this before, that unfortunately my films remain relevant. And it's unfortunate because they're talking about things you would hope would disappear, would get corrected. There would be enough of a movement to actually change the system for the better, but that hasn't happened. If anything, we have slid further down the road. And in terms of protest, you're absolutely right. In a city like Bombay, you cannot walk down with thousands of people down the main roads of Bombay, unless you're the Maratha Morcha and supported by the government. But if you are an oppositional Morcha of the working class, you certainly cannot get away with it. We are all shoved into Azad Maidan, which is ironically named. It's where you're Azad to be invisible, because it's cut off from everybody else. You go into a little corner, which is already a small part of the Maidan. Most of the Maidan is cordoned off. And so yeah, they've made protest into like a museum protest. It's not a protest that the public can see. Not just in Bombay. It's happened to Delhi. It used to be Boat Club, then it became Jantar Mantar, and literally there's no place you can go out and express your citizenship rights. And so that is the India that we live in. It's not just India. I think the whole world has gone in that direction, almost the whole world. And so we are witnessing this new kind of system, which I think it'll turn around again at some point, but right now we're in the middle of its, hopefully its worst phase.
I was going to say that I think what are the sort of continuities of urban policy and stuff that state power, social inequity and stuff that the film exposes, that to
It's on.
yeah that the film exposes that sort of make these images, the arguments and stuff, and that the to this day, I mean, it seems so contemporary as opposed to historic. So what could be the change that we hope for? I mean, I suppose it is housing, it is better wages. It's I mean, we as a society too have not really changed. It's not just government policy. You know, I mean, I think we'd like to believe it just as government policy, but government policy doesn't change unless there's pressure to change the policy. And I think we still don't see people and it's not an, equitable society. We still have such a marked difference between the haves and have-nots. And that's really what I find very chilling in this whole thing, that today we don't have that.
So it's also that when I was making the film in the early 80s, mid 80s, there was a language of protest that existed. There was the concept that working class had rights, the homeless have, you can see that they're oppressed, but they have the right to say so. And now you don't have that right. Now, in fact, every inch of available land is being in front of our eyes, gobbled up by the super rich, by a few families that control that are the land grabbers, the builders. It's a nexus between this and so I think these kind of questions that are asked in this film are not even asked anymore. Right. It's you take it for granted that, and then this concept of legal and illegal has to be explored, because what is legal and what is illegal? They keep calling, I mean, even in your father's film made 10 years before 1975, the film we saw yesterday, it was the concept of these are illegal people and we've got to do something. But in no way, in any ethical sense, could you call them illegal compared to the people who live in high-rises, because every high-rise person has done incredible illegal things to get that property.
But yes, and I think even as recently as 5 years ago during the pandemic, when all commerce came to a grinding halt, at least for daily wage earners, they had to walk back to where? To the villages and stuff that they left sometimes 2-3 generations ago. And that was accepted because they were migrants. What is it, I mean, I just want to raise that question. What does it mean to be a migrant in a country where you have the freedom to move to any place and supposedly live in any place in the country? How can that be, how can you be a migrant except that you don't have a pakka dwelling? So that's the difference. It's just like, well, this is not, so the housing component, the having the tap, having access to water and stuff, these are really part of being a citizen, to be part of a city. And that's what's being denied, I think, to people, and we have to recognize that. I think I was really quite appalled by that very easily being saying that these people are migrants, let them go back. That's, I mean, it's just there in the film 40 years ago too.
It's powerfully present in the film. Some of our friends don't come off very well in that film, I'm afraid. And some of them have also changed their views, it must be said. I think it's dawned on many of them that this isn't much of a functioning democracy anymore. So that's just a footnote. But to your point, Nandita, could I just say that our understanding of settlement and mobility is also trapped in what is ultimately a colonial anthropology. We tend to think that, when we think about migration, we are largely thinking either of a kind of transhumans. You're happy to see pastoralists wander about with their flocks, and that you believe that that happens far away in the mountains. But cities are about dwelling, legality, the ration card, and all of this. I don't think we've expanded our understanding of settlement, urban settlement, to include the fact that a great many people in the city are migrants anyway. There may be extreme conditions of famine, drought, social asymmetry, exploitation, and there are. These drive people to the cities from the villages, which some of our friends there thought were idyllic places no one should leave. But there's also the fact that people distribute their lives in a seasonal fashion. Particularly Bombay. I mean, there are people who come in from the Konkan. We all know this from our lived experience. People come in from the Konkan in a certain season, they work, then they go back to tend to their small holdings and their crops. Yet larger cycles of people coming in from the Gangetic areas. So we have not somehow included the fact of migration as a legitimate kind of mobility. And I think that is something we need to shift our civic perception and also have this reflected somehow in law, which is not really undisconnected from your plea for social housing. So that's one set of thoughts. The other thing which moors this in the film again is, the film gains great historic importance also because it's set in that period between 1977, the emergency ends, we move forward with a certain set of insights about citizenship. Between 77 and 92, when your film ends by saying Mazdoor ka shasan hoga. Mazdoor as a key trope is replaced by Mandir in 92. The entire complexion of politics changes and priorities shift and new symbols take over. So could we ask you to spell this out in your own journey? I'm thinking of how does this film sit, for instance, with Ram Ke Naam, another kind of framework of belonging and what it means to be a citizen.
So if you look at it, this film is early 80s. I started filming in 1982. When I had come back from being a student abroad and almost for the first time started noticing that there were homeless people literally outside my house, and that they were being denied even the little that they had scraped together, and that was being demolished. And so in a sense it's a period of liberalization that had, why was Bombay suddenly interested in clearing its slums is because they were trying to become attractive to foreign capital. And it was explicitly stated that way. I mean, even Godrej talks about tourism. The tourists won't come. We make nice films to attract them. And so it was this idea of what a city should look like, and people had to be, basically that's done even today. I mean, if you saw in G20, they did the same thing. When the G20 people had arrived they'd put little boards hiding all the poor areas from the eye of the cars that would pass through the road. And in Bombay, they did macabre things like even have painted trees and paint, yeah. So instead of the real trees. So this is the kind of bizarre scenario that we live in, which stems from the fact that those who have captured property and wealth think that it's perfectly all right to just use everything to protect what they have captured, and I guess this has happened through time, but it's very, very obvious right now. And then they try to have a kind of for their own comfort, have the idea of what is legal, what is not legal.
should we open it up then to questions from the audience?
And it's a universal issue, really. It's about, in a sense, settler colonialism, like what Israel has done to the Palestinians. The fact that they just decided to take their land and settle there and do a genocide. And the Americans did exactly that. They wiped out the entire native population of America to create what we call America today, the white America. And everybody in America, Trump talks about immigrants when everybody is an immigrant.
Maybe let's invite questions and then we'll look back.
Hi, I just wanted to ask a question to do with perhaps planning and solutions to the problems that have been highlighted by the film. I hope I didn't miss anything critical in the film. I did miss the beginning of it. But it strikes me that in a country that like we have, with the constitution as it is, with the federal structure as it is, with the powers of the states and the powers of the center and so on, what really might a solution be like in a situation like this? I was just trying to imagine, okay, so a responsible government would probably say, okay, look, we can't just clear people off pavements and, you know, when they're occupying these places, they have nothing else. There is a responsibility, an ethical, if not an absolute legal responsibility, and certainly it's in the constitution, you know, we should give equality of economic equality as well. Then maybe that's to provide some social housing. But then let's just take, for example, a state like Goa. Suppose the state was good at it and they provided social housing and people did not need to occupy public lands and stay on pavements and so on. In a country like India, wouldn't that then kind of get out of control? A lot of people would then want to come to Goa because Goa does it and Bihar doesn't do it. And so where does it all end? What is the solution really, I guess?
So I think, I mean, this is a question that I've been asked with this film so often. So what is your solution, right? And as an urban planner, for instance, I'm not an urban planner, but people imagine that the city of Bombay or Goa, for instance, can create a solution by itself. And that, I think, is not, obviously not true. Because it has to be, and I think it has to do with our development paradigm. The fact that, which we followed from independence onwards. It's not that the new regime in power is doing it for the first time. But it is a development paradigm that was very different to the development paradigm of, say, Gandhi. The economic understanding of Gandhi, which people criticize all the time, and Gandhi is considered a fool because he talked about decentralized development, where the poorest of the poor, local units all over the country, all in villages, would themselves create a kind of internal system, and development would be measured by that, and not the development of the urban elite alone. So I think that is a development paradigm that we've followed since independence, which has to be questioned, because if nothing else, Gandhi today, in the light of catastrophic climate change and the kind of development model that is destroying the world at a huge rate, is talking sense more than not just I'm not just talking about the ruling elites in power, but I'm even talking about the opposition. Even the left had no alternate model of development that would not destroy the planet, that would not rob people of their rights at the local level.
I just feel that perhaps this is...
And the question boils down to, can architects solve the problem? I don't think architects can solve the problem, because architects are still working with steel and concrete. And that steel and concrete is actually destroying the planet. So it's not something that you can give an easy answer to.
Yeah, and I think we need a more, at a national level, a clear policy. I think to everyone, if you sort of try and solve the problem at a much smaller scale of just a small kind of part of a city or at the level of the state or something, yes, it cannot have a clear a clear sort of set of, because they're not a clear set of rules that have been set up. We don't know where we're actually heading. We really do need a proper, I think, national policy for urbanization, but also perhaps even for the rural areas. How do you hold people back from not having to come to the cities? And right now, as far as I know, I think by 2050, which is not so far away, 25 years from now, more than half the country will be urban. That's just a huge, huge scale. So, you know, more even than what I was talking about yesterday of over 500 cities, over a lakh population. We're really talking about huge scale urbanization, and we need to find solutions like what you're talking about, Anand, of finding different ways to build and even the infrastructure. We have to, it's not about just putting in, you know, sort of fast roads and rail and stuff. It's because that's again what the haves can afford. It's also looking at what people the income levels, everything needs to be tied in. It's just like no one can resolve it unless all of this is being talked about. There's not enough public debate, I think, in many ways, and that's partly what a forum like this is trying to do, is just to get people to understand. And it's not necessarily just planners or economists, urban economists and stuff. It is everyone, and you have to somehow also be able to discuss it, to understand enough to discuss it.
Because the theme again here is questions of justice. And it strikes me again, I'm thinking about the film again. It has lost none of its capacity to move us. And I think it reminds us that appeals to justice or the quest for a new justice, a renovated justice, must ultimately have an affective basis. There's a basis in compassion, in empathy, in recognizing the vulnerability, I advisedly say, of the other in this case, however you devise the other. And speaking from a Levinasian perspective here, how do you place yourself in the presence of the other? That's a fundamental question which we are now encouraged not to look at. So there's been a complete move towards safeguarding privilege, practicing impunity, regarding vulnerability with contempt, spectacular cruelty. These have now become the norms, not only in Trumpian America, but very much here and over the last 15 years or so. So we can't wish that away. I think questions like the ones you pose have also to be situated in this larger, I'm going to think about it as a kind of a landscape of public emotions, if you will. So we need a coalition of people active in different fields to achieve this. Because it occurs to me, person after person that you speak to here is appealing to our conscience. Now, what are you going to do in a scenario when you're told that the conscience is an expendable luxury and you don't really need it because progress is crucial?
Yeah, so it's really, the starting point is for you to see everybody as a citizen. If you see everybody as a citizen, then you start thinking differently about what development should look like, and you know where we locate ourselves in it. And I don't mean just self-flagellation for those who are the haves, who were accidental beneficiaries of history, and therefore they have. I mean, I have an apartment where I live. I pay very low rent because Bombay has rent control, and somebody else has inherited wealth or whatever. But you see that as an accident and not as a right.
Yeah, good morning. I'm just wondering, this is a common problem around the world. I mean, every major city has migrant labor coming in or migrant workforce coming in. Has there been any solution anywhere that we can use as a prototype? Has there been anything we can follow, take an example, or are we just all, muddling around in the dark, the whole world?
I don't know of solutions, but I do know from my reading that all that we see that people have today was because it was captured. I mean, all over the world. I mean, if you look at what colonialism did from the 16th century onwards, I'm not talking only the British were the worst example perhaps, but the way they just marauded and massacred people all across the world in order to have what they have now. So unless you have a emotional understanding of what that massacre was, and we as the beneficiaries of that massacre, we are the ones who captured land or property or whatever to be where we are today, then you may have the humility to look for real solutions. But if we're looking at surface kind of, I mean, even in terms of just urban planning, I remember the time when your father and Shirish Patel and people were trying to look for solution to Bombay, that they used to talk about sites and services as a sites and services, meaning that if there's a slum, you don't say, okay, we'll build an SRA scheme and build a high-rise and shove everybody into those tall buildings. But you actually allowed the, I mean, after all, in many cases, the slum dwellers were the best architects. They had already constructed some home with very little materials from whatever they could find, and they lived there. And instead of learning from how a slum is organized and how whatever meager resources there are shared, we actually impose a top-down system of just knocking them out, throwing them away, and then building in their name cheap housing, which they never actually occupied. That cheap housing became expensive housing, and that's how the builders captured all the territory that was there to capture. In the name of the poor, in the name of whether it was Urban Sealing Act or whatever it was, they were always broken. Even after this film, we went on a hunger strike because some of the slums where I had filmed were again demolished, even though this film won a national award. And in fact, a slum dweller went to receive the national award because I pretended to be sick and went to Delhi, received the award. She's in the film. She's a very articulate woman who spoke in Marathi at the beginning of the film, and you see her a few times. But she, so apart from that, another slum in Colaba got demolished, and then we went on hunger strike to fight for those people to get rehabilitation in another place. And we would have been on hunger strike, they would never have listened to us, but Shabana Azmi joined the hunger strike, and in 5 days it became so, the government was in so much pressure that they actually gave in. We won that little battle, and people were resettled in Goregaon, and from the Sangharsh Nagar that it was called when it was in Colaba, it became Sangharsh Nagar in Goregaon. That was a minor victory, but even that, in retrospect, we understood that in fact the government got that land from people who were affected by the Urban Land Sealing Act, and they gave this little bit of land from their lot in return for the right to build high-rises somewhere else. So this is the paradigm. that even when we fight and we win, we actually, in the larger context, we didn't win.
And I think also, sorry, there are sort of ways of finding solutions. Charles used to talk about an urban manifesto which he had written about, which was mainly to do with housing, but also sort of making the housing really some housing that you could use, sort of adequacy, as in finding housing that also had proper transportation, public transportation, etc. But the housing itself was like sites and services were small pieces of land, very small, not bigger than the footprints that the informal settlements have, just really very tiny. But it allows for incremental growth. And Charles felt that was very important because as people got sort of had little more savings, they could add another slab, they could add, spaces, and that would help. That's a solution. It's not that the government has to come in and build the housing for the people. It could be different ways. And I think, I'm not so sure that we need to find a solution, a so-called solution, like finding what Dubai is doing or finding what Singapore is doing and trying to ape that. We can find solutions that would work for India, work for our economic model, work for our social sort of structure. Yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead. No, so another thing that we should consider is that when these slums were seen as eyesores and all of that, and then the solution was to put them into a high-rise, another thing that got sacrificed is the sense of community. Because even though people are desperately poor, they do have a community in the slum. Everybody does things together, cultural things and economic things. But once you're in that little one apartment kind of urban scene, there's no longer a community.
Just to address your point and speak to everything that you've brought up, and to go back to the film, I've seen it a number of times. What struck me very strongly this time was what in the best sense I would call the rhetoric. How is it that people are speaking? Beneath the appeal, the plaint, the expression of rage and frustration, there's also a great deal of wisdom and of just the knowledge of making. And I think that when we're considering these questions, we too often come to them from the top-down perspective of expert culture. We think architects have, with respect, we tend to think architects somehow have the answers or will find them. I think what might be important is for architects and planners to develop a very crucial humility and the ability to learn from some of these people, these communities, because there's a way in which their lived experience offers solutions which we need to learn to appreciate and understand. And there's a very particular architectural project that I often recur to, which really reprogrammed the understanding of who the client was. I'm thinking of Revati Kamat's 1970s project, Anand Gram. Right? She worked with displaced craftspeople and puppeteers in Delhi. And the way it worked was she actually sat down with them, primarily with the women who were the primary users, and did exactly what you were saying, Anand. She figured out how they mapped space, how they regarded utilities, how they felt the flow of services should be. And, this is something I'd like to share here, that maybe there's a case for learning from people who you think are not experts, in this case. Just putting that in play.
Yeah, one small observation and one question. The small observation is a Goan. Fortunately or unfortunately, both Suktankar and Ribello are Goans originally, and both are migrants. The second question is that, you said that the film is still relevant today, and you shot it somewhere in 85, 40 years back, 4 decades, when liberalization had just begun. Today, if Anand Patwardhan has to make edition 2 of Hamara Shahar, how would it be?
It's a difficult question. If anything, there's one problem that in those days, at least when I went to the elite classes, they were quite innocent in terms of they didn't realize that what they said could be used against them. That they were willingly spoken. In fact, I have to thank S.P. Godrej, who was actually a sweet man. He spoke his mind, and we got it on film. Most people today would not use that language because they've learned that this language will make us look silly and will make us look, So I think that's the difficulty of today. People are more sophisticated in the elite. The government bureaucrats are more sophisticated. So to catch them off guard is not going to be as easy as it was in 1985. And today we live in a criminalized environment. It's not just development. It's actually criminalized. So the only people who have that kind of money and power are like the mafia. The mafia that rules us is completely tied to the mafia that builds the high rises and grabs the land. So it's a much darker scenario than it was. And so we have to negotiate that today. I don't have the answer. I don't know what to do other than rail against it.
So I have an observation.
Sorry, could that just be the last question here?
Okay. This is an
Running out of
observation. There has been a repeated mention of illegal immigrants. And this whole concept of illegal comes from, narrow definition of justice. So isn't it time to expand the concept of justice and make it a felt reality? How do people experience justice? And as was mentioned earlier, when concepts like compassion, dialogue, conversation, wouldn't that change things a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the idea of illegal immigrant is actually, at least from our own beings, we have to discard it completely. I mean, how is a Bangladeshi poor person who lands up in India because of economic hardship or political hardship become a non-human being? Or in any part of the world. I mean, you have horrific things being done to people who are called illegal immigrants. It's been going on for the last 30 years or so, where people are trying to escape desperate conditions in their own land to find somewhere they can get shelter, and then they're called illegal and deprived of any rights. So I think in our minds we have to get rid of that category.
Well, thank you very, very much, Anand. Thank you for letting us screen this film and for this discussion. Thanks, Ranjit.